Hello everyone. Watch this picture. MySQL concat function and string value must be maybe A to Z or string 3 maybe 0 to 9. It syntax and example and output is maybe A to Z or 0 to 9 including value. So MySQL provides the well abused functionality of allowing a text file to be read into the database through its load data in file and load file commands. According to the current MySQL reference manual, the load data in file statement reads rows from a text file into a table at a very high speed, and the file name must be given as a literal string. Let's examine the use of the load data in file command as like this. Then we will run the following command within the MySQL console to create a table to house the author details like MySQL, then create table fname row information fname char 50 sname char 50 email char 100 and 0 rows. With the table ready to accept it done, just make it your own way. Pen testing MySQL basic information. MySQL is a freely available open source relational database management system that uses structured, and this is connect local connection and remote connection command. MySQL -a host name and enumeration using nmap. Write any binary data. How you guys can write any binary data? Basic and interesting MySQL commands like show database, use database show tables, describe tables name, generate table schema privilege type from schema privileges, user file version, user database name, execute code, and come to basic MySQL union select 1 2 3 4 group concat table name from information schema dot tables and union select 1 2 3 4 column name from information schema columns where table name equal table name. This is union operator in MySQL. And you guys can change MySQL root password, update MySQL user, set password and flash privileges. MySQL -u username and -p many commands.sql file with all the commands, and this is MySQL arbitrary read file by client, and here is the command. Local data in file slash password and if it running as root is the command, and privilege escalation, or for Windows this is the command insert select create delete, extracting MySQL credentials, enabling logging, some useful files, default MySQL database tables. So pen testing MySQL and all the information. MySQL Union is an operator that allows us to combine two or more results from multiple select queries into a single result set. It comes with a default feature that removes the duplicate rows from the result set. MySQL always uses the name of the column in the first select statement will be the column names of the result set output, and MySQL Union must follow these basic rules like the number and order of the columns should be the same in all tables that you are going to use. The data type must be compatible with the corresponding positions of each select query. The column name selected in the different select queries must be in the same order. MySQL Union syntax, and this is the basic syntax: select column list from 1 to 2. MySQL Union example: first create two tables and see how the union operator works in MySQL. Here is table 1 and some information about student 1, and table 2 some information about student 2. The following statement returns a result set that contains student names and subjects by combining both tables. When you execute this statement, you will notice that if the student name and subject have the same field in both tables, then each one will be listed once. It is because the union operator returns only the distinct values like select start underscore name subject from student 1 union and select start name underscore name subject from student 2. After executing the above statement, you will get the following output like this from this table 1 and table 2, and the union executing is the result is this. In the above output, you can see the MySQL Union uses the heading of the column name of the result set the name as the column name of the first select statement, and the following example explains it more clearly. Select star underscore name as student underscore name subject as course from student 1 union select star underscore name, and this is the result. MySQL Union so this is how the union work in two table. Have a look in this picture, table 1 and table 2 and table 3. You will find more information on such encoding attacks in previous lecture. The load file function also handles binary files transparently, which means that with a little bit of finesse, we can use the function to read binary files from the remote host easily, like MySQL create table query, then MySQL insert into faucet line, load file, then query, and MySQL select star from FOO, like line, one row, and of course the binary data are not viewable, making it unusable to us, but MySQL set it. You can use the substring function to split this, effectively obtaining chunks of the binary file at a time to overcome limitations that the application might impose. Load file also accepts universal naming convention UNC paths, which allows an enterprising attacker to search for files on other machines, or even to cause the MySQL server to connect back to his own machine, like MySQL select load underscore file, then star file name, and as usual have a look in this picture. And that's it for today, guys. Hope you guys liked the lecture, and thanks for watching. Hello everyone. So what is MySQL schema? So here is the definition of MySQL export schema. MySQL export schema is a technique featuring exporting the database DDL for database objects like tables, functions, views, triggers, packages, procedures, and packages bodies. The target purpose may be an SQL commander editor, any clipboard or file. In this, MySQL export method is in the database. A user can export all database objects, or we can also just make any selection. Basically, the MySQL schema is known to be the system schema that includes all tables, information or data, dictionary tables, or say database object metadata stored in the server and required for query operations performed. Hence, in MySQL, we can export these schemas or databases to an external file in different formats available, such as SQL, CSV, docx, .xml, Microsoft Excel, or many more. Here is some syntax. We can export schema in the form of a table or whole database in a tranquil way by querying the outcome into a CSV file that exists in the MySQL database server. But before we implement to export data, a user needs to ensure the following things, like a user should have write access in the MySQL server process to the target folder, which consists of the target CSV file, and the target CSV file should not be present there. So select star from books where language equal English into out file. This is location. c/tmp books info.csv fields enclosed by escaped by lines terminated by /r or /n. This is a syntax. When the query is executed in the server, then this statement will create a CSV file named books_info.csv in the specific folder. This particular file exported will include lines of table rows in the resulting group. Here every line is completed by a structure of carries to return along with a line feed character stated by the lines terminated by clause. Every line comprises values of every table column of the table row in the set of results. Every value is surrounded by double quotes defined by fields enclosed by closed. How to export schema in MySQL? First step, MySQL is currently possessed by Oracle and an open source database. MySQL stores schemas that include everything present in the table structure like fields, views, privileges, triggers, objects, attributes, indexes, operators, functions, along with data that can be accessed using the SQL language. This MySQL export schema helps export the schemas from a database or contain a specific table and can be imported to any other database or table having identical schemas as in the previous one. And in more, schemas in MySQL provides the logical structure to store data and values in the form of table rows and columns with query all database objects, functional procedures, data types, constraint, grouped information to add features, and implementing new collections using information schemas and relational databases. In simple words, we can say that a MySQL database is a set of schemas, whereas a schema is a set of tables. The schema can be applied to represent a section of the database which is using query. So this is how export schema in MySQL. This is an example, like when we need to use export schema structure to export any database or table from server using phpMyAdmin, then we will follow this step. And when you access your phpMyAdmin page and log in through the username and password as defined by any user who operates it, then you will find a list of database created within the server, just like the picture. Again, choose the export option, then you can find it, find the value and data. So file read and write. It is possible to read local files providing you have insert and administrator bulk operations permissions. The following SQL will read the local file. This is path into a local file table and create table local file data varchar 8000 and bulk insert local file from boot. You can then extract data back out from the local file table using a select statement. If you are extracting table data error messages, you may be limited to one row per query. In this case, you may need a point of reference to select each row one by one. You can use the alter table statement to add an auto-incrementing identify column to the local file table. The following statement will add an identity column named id with an initial value of 1, extracting schema information from MySQL 5.0 or later version. This is data and query, current database, select database, list database, query, select schema underscore name from information underscore schema dot schemata, and list database, list tables within the current database, select table name from information schema dot tables, where table underscore schema equal database, and list all tables for all user defined databases, like select table underscore schema dot table underscore name from information underscore schema dot table, so table schema equal information underscore schema and table schema equal MySQL, and list columns within a specific table. This is a post procedure actually, and select column name underscore name from information schema dot columns, or table underscore name equal table users quotation hash returns columns from table users, and list all columns for user defined tables, like select table underscore schema and table underscore name column underscore name from information schema dot columns, where table schema is related. Blind SQL injection functions. So data and query, string length, extract substring from a given string, and length. Just have a look at this picture. And if statement, select if 1 equal 1, a return, then it obviously returns a. So cracking database passwords, you can extract user password hashes from the MySQL.user table as long as your current user account has the required privilege to return a colon separated list of usernames and password hashes. Executed the statement like concat user comma star semicolon, then password, and from mysql.user. So guys, that's it for today. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching.
In this lecture, we're going to be talking about database structure discovery. So let's first talk about MySQL. So MySQL, it is the technique for enumerating a database for extracting its data follow a hierarchy approach and you start extracting the names of the database and then proceed down to table, column, and finally the data itself. The first thing you usually interested in the name of a user performing the queries. So you can retrieve this with one of the following queries. So to list a database that you are present with the remote MySQL installation, you can use the following query. So if you have administrator privileges, this one. So if you don't have administrator privileges, then the remote MySQL version is 5.0 or later, then you can still obtain the same information using information schema by injecting the following alternative, this one. So this is the getting the data username and password. So in this case, so querying information schema allows you to enumerate the whole database structure. So once you have retrieved the database, you have found one of them that looks particularly interesting, like from this line, as you can see, this one, customers underscore db. So you can extract this table name with the following this, if you follow this. So or if you prefer to obtain a list of the table of all database, you can simply omit it, the where clause, this one, where clause. So but you want to modify as it follows like this. Such a query will retrieve all table except the one that belongs to MySQL and information underscore schema. This one, information underscore schema. To build in database or whose table you are probably not interested in. So once you have the tables, it is time to retrieve the columns again, avoiding all entries that belongs to MySQL and MySQL and information underscore schema. So this is the one that you should follow. So how to store password in your database? The scenario that was just illustrated, in which a few queries have been enough to retrieve a list of username and password unencrypted, which means in clear text, which is not as usual as you might think. During our penetration test and security assessment, we have come across plenty of cases in which vulnerable application had password and other sensitive data stored in a plain text. The danger of storing user password in a plain text poses many dangers, because human beings have the tendency to reuse the same password on several different online services over and over again. Even I myself do this. So a successful attack such as the one described might pose a threat not only the user's account on victim's account, but also have other areas on the online identity, such as online banking and private email, and the victim might even be liable for those additional backends depending on the specific law of the countries where it resides. So up to some times ago, the recommended approach for storing password was cryptographic hash function. A cryptographic hash function transforms an arbitrary value, so in our case the user password, into a fixed length string, which is called the hash value. This function has several mathematical properties, but there are two most important thing of them. So one of them is, given a hash value, it is extremely difficult to construct a value that generates it. The second one is, the probability that two different values generated the same hash value is very, very low. Storing the hash value of the password instead of the password itself, it still allows user to authenticate, because it's enough to calculate the hash value of the password that they provide and compare it with the stored hash value. However, it provides a security advantages, because if the list is in hash value that is captured, the attacker would not be able to convert them back to the original password without going through the hard brute force attack. Adding an additional random value on the hash input, which is called a salt, also protect the password against pre-computation based attack. Unluckily, in the past few years, we have witnessed an enormous increase in the computing power available to attackers. mostly thanks to the use of graphical processing graphical processing unit, which allow massively parallelized computation. Since all modern general purposes cryptographic hash functions have been designed for speed, they are inherently vulnerable to modern GPU based brute force attacks. The answer is using an algorithm that is specifically designed for the computationally very slow and expensive, such as bcrypt or scrypt. Bcrypt is an adaptive password hashing algorithm with a work factor which allows the user to decide how expensive the hashing computation will be. With a proper tuning of the work factor, any brute force attack against a bcrypt will be several order of magnitude slower than attack against a MD5 or SHA-256. Scrypt is based on the concept of sequential memory hard functions, meaning that the hashing is not only CPU intensive but also memory intensive, making things hard even for a custom hardware attack, so in which integer circuit is specially designed for cryptographic brute force attack that are used. Of course, using such algorithm will not protect you against SQL injection attacks. So finally, I can say that scrypt provides a level of security that is even higher than bcrypt, but at the time of right now, it is a self-contained executable, making it a less useful compared to bcrypt, which has a set of APIs and is supported out of the box by all modern technologies for web application development. So whichever you decide to use, you will use a lot of more secure than trusting MD5 or SHA. So you have no excuse. So stop using generic hashing algorithm to store your password for your own safety. So this will provide you the comprehensive view of all database tables and columns that all packaged in a one nice table. So you can see from this example. As you can see, if your web application allowed to perform an union select, such as query gives you a full description of the whole database server in one simple shot. Alternatively, if you prefer to go other way around and look for a table that contains a specific column you are interested into, then you can use this one. Information underscore schema does not contain only the structure of the database but also all the relevant information regarding the privilege of the database user and the permission that they have granted. For instance, to list the privilege granted the various users, so you can execute the following query using this, then the query will return the output of this. So if you need to know the privilege granted to user on the different databases, the following query will be do this job. So this one. So unfortunately, information underscore schema is available only, this one is available only in MySQL 5 or later. So if you are dealing with an earlier version, the process will be more difficult. As a brute force attack, that might be the only way to determine the name of the table and columns. So one thing you can do is to access the file that stored the database and import their raw input into a table that you can create and then extract the same table using one of the techniques. So let's briefly walk through a couple of examples of this technique. So you can easily find the current database name using these techniques, just type select and space database. So then the files for this database will be stored in a directory with the same name as the database itself. The directory will be contained in the MySQL data directory, which is returned by the and this one select space double data directory. So each table of the database is contained in a file with the extension MID. So for instance, there are some of the MID file as a default MySQL database. As you can see, couple of them, 1, 2, 3, 5 of them MID file. So you can extract the contents of a specific table of the database with the following using this line. However, without information schema, which means this one underscore schema, you will have to brute force the table name for the query to be succeed. Also note that load underscore file, this one which is discussed previously, only allows you to retrieve a maximum number of bytes that is specified at the this data directory. So this technique is not suited for tables that store large amount of data.
Hey there, let's talk about blind SQL injection. So blind SQL injection, in this section we'll describe what blind SQL injection is, explain various techniques for finding and exploiting blind SQL injection vulnerabilities. So what is blind SQL injection? Blind SQL injection arises when an application is vulnerable to SQL injection, but its HTTP responses do not contain the results of the relevant SQL query or the details of any database errors. With blind SQL injection vulnerabilities, many techniques such as union attacks are not effective because they rely on being able to see the results of the injected query within the application's responses, and it is still possible to exploit blind SQL injection to access unauthorized data, but different techniques must be used. Exploiting blind SQL injection by triggering conditional responses. Consider an application that uses tracking cookies to gather analytics about users. Requests to the application include a cookie header like this: cookie tracking ID. This is a tracking ID. When a request containing a tracking ID cookie is processed, the application determines whether this is a non-user using an SQL query like this. Select tracking ID from tracking users, where tracking ID equal ID. This query is vulnerable to SQL injection, but the results from the query are not returned to the user. However, the application does behave differently depending on whether the query returns any data. If it is returns data because a recognized tracking ID was submitted, then a welcome back message is displayed within the page, and this behavior is enough to be able to exploit the blind SQL injection vulnerability and retrieve information by triggering different responses conditionally depending on an injected condition. So the first of these values will cause the query to return results because the injected and 1 equal 1 condition is true, and so the welcome back message will be displayed. Whereas the second value will cause the query do not return any results because the injected condition is false and so the welcome back message will not be displayed. And this allows us to determine the answer to any single injected condition and so extract data one bit at a time. For example, suppose there is a table called users with the columns username and password and a user called administrator. We can systematically determine the password for the user by sending a series of inputs to test the password one character at a time. And to do this, we start with the input like this: select password from user, so our username administrator 11, and this returns the welcome back message indicating that the injected condition is true, and so the first character of the password is greater than m. And next we send the following input, and this does not return the welcome back message indicating that the injected condition is false, and so the first character of the password is not greater than t. Eventually we send the following input which returns the welcome back message, thereby confirming that the first character of the password is s. Automating blind SQL injection exploitation. The techniques discussed in this tutorial regarding blind SQL injection enable the extraction and retrieval of database contents in a highly automated manner using either interface techniques or alternative channels. A number of tools are available to help an attacker exploit blind SQL injection vulnerabilities, and information and examples are provided below for 6 popular tools. Absinthe, this GPL tool, was one of the first automated interface tool in widespread use and is a good starting point for examining automated blind SQL injection exploitation. And requirements, some requirements like Windows, Linux, Mac, .NET frameworks or Mono, and scenarios are generic error page, controlled output, Oracle, PostgreSQL, or many other. So this is the Absinthe information like host information, database schema, and some download records store. You can customize exploit type, connection, authentication. Support plugins, the target URL is then entered along with whether the request is formatted as a post or get method. Finally, each parameter that should be contained in the request is entered in the name text box along with a default value. If the parameter is susceptible to SQL injection, then the injectable parameter checkbox should be selected, as should the thread value as string checkbox if the parameter is of type string in the SQL query. Do not forget to add in all parameters needed for the vulnerable page to process the request, and this includes hidden fields such as view state on .NET pages, Once the configuration is complete, click Initialize Injection, and this sends a bunch of test requests in order to determine the response difference that the interface will be based on. If no errors are reported, then click on the DB Schema tab, which displays two active buttons: Retrieve username and load table information. The first button will retrieve and display the database login used by the vulnerable page, and the second button will retrieve a list of user defined tables from the current database. Once table information has been loaded, click on a table name in the tree B of database objects and click load field information, which will retrieve a list of all column names in the selected table. As soon as that has been completed, click on the download records tab, provide an output file name. In the file name text box, select the columns you wish to retrieve by clicking on the column name and then clicking add, and finally click on download fields to XML, and this will dump the selected columns to the output file. Another one is deep blind SQL injection. Time delay depends on the wanted value, and you have to declare integer, character, set, query, vary binary, var binary, and you have to set position. Just look this example, how to declare and set integer, character, and position is the data, query is the data that you want to get, and this can be variable like user or function like db name, or it can be a select statement which returns one row and one column, and position is the half byte you want to read. You need to add to eliminate the OX. And seconds is the multiplier for wait time. Waiting time can be tweaked, but also by using fractions like wait for delay. So that's it.
And in this lecture, I'd like to show you an example of how to discover and exploit and a blind SQL injection. Now, the SQL injection is one that it doesn't display any errors to you. So, in our previous example, we see a SQL injection. So, if I put and go to this in here and put a single quote, and as you can see, it will show you a error for me which tell me that this page is vulnerable and I can exploit this page with an SQL injection. And I like this key objection, however it will not show an error in blind SQL. So let's try that. As you can see, it doesn't show anything. So right here in blind SQL, you will see that it's not going to show me any error at all. So this doesn't mean that this web page isn't vulnerable. It just means that the website might not be display the errors, and this page might have a blind SQL injection and real life scenarios. And real life scenarios, I always approach this page and try to discover it to exploit in them to blind as an SQL injection. So I never actually look for error and I never depend on just to input in a single code. So the way I test for the existence of this SQL injection is that I try to inject a true or false statement, then I see so if the page behave according to the statement that I am given. So if I give a true statement, it should give me a valid page. So if I give a false statement, it will give me an invalid page. So what I mean is by a invalid page is a page that doesn't look like what I expect. So it doesn't have to show any error. So this will come working right here. So in this example, I'm just want to see a valid page. So let's just submit. As you can see, so literally I'm just putting a normal user ID and we can see that it's giving us a valid page. So it's given us the first name and the surname. So this is what's by the default. So what a valid page looks like in this web application. So the first things I'm going to try is to do, I'm going to try to give it a true statement. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I will create a statement that returns a true, and this is going to be a first one will be this one is equal to 1. So this thing is obviously true when I inject this. So if the page is vulnerable, it should still show me so the valid page, and then it will inject. So let's put this copy id is equal to paste, put %23. So let's try submit. As you can see, it showed id 1 is equal to 1, first name admin, surname admin. So it injected in this in here. So it shows a valid page, and now it's showing me a valid page again, showing the first name and the surname. So it executed while I am telling it. So I told it that 1 is equal to 1. So 1 is equal to 1 is a true statement and it's not going to affect the execution of the page. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to inject a full statement. So I'm going to try to bake this page even though I'm giving in a valid ID. So let's try 1 is equal to 0. So as you can see, 1 is equal to 0 is false. So rest, as you can see, it shows nothing. It as previously when we did a single quote, that means it's not a valid page. So you won't see any errors like we see in our normal SQL injection, but you can see that the page is invalid. So it's not disciplined. So what to display even we are giving the ID is equal to 1. So when we give a true statement, it's given a valid page, and when we give a false statement, it gives a invalid page. So we can also verify this using the order by. So let's try this. In here 1 is equal to 0. So let's paste. As you can see, order by 1. So this is a true statement and it displays the valid page that we have seen. So we can also change this to a false statement to give us a invalid page. So we are just going to add a random number in here. So let's try this. As you can see, it gives a invalid page, and even it doesn't actually show us a error page in the SQL. It's an invalid page. Now that we are assured that the page is vulnerable, we can actually exploit the vulnerability exactly the same way that we exploit the normal SQL injection. So I can just do in a select union. So let's try to edit in here. So we're going to type 1 select union select 1 2 1 comma 2 1 select union select so I did some mistake in here. It should be just union select, not select dot select union select. So just like this. So as you can see, it gives us an SQL injection and display the stuff in 1 and 2. So what I'm going to do is we are going to select a table name. So let's try select in here, select space table and names. So select table names 1 2, then we are going to use a from information schema as a schema and then dot tables. DABLES tables. So I did a union select table underscore name table underscore name 1 2 names name 1 2 from information schema dot. Okay, I think I did some mistakes in here, so let's try again. 1 select union table. Okay, I think there is a problem in here, so my mistake. 2 from information, as you can see. So the exploitation is exactly the same whether it's a blind or normal SQL injection. So only difference is the way that you discover it, and I recommend that you always approach your website using this method 1 is equal to 1, 1 is equal to 0 order by. The thing is I never rely on only using a code, so always try to use the hand one ones equal to 1, 1 is equal to 0 and order by order to discover these types of vulnerability, because if you rely on this code you will be missing a lot of blind SQL injection and they are just useful as normal as your injection. So let's talk about enumerating via ASCII value. So but first let's talk about what is ASCII, and I hope you all know what ASCII value is. So ASCII is a 7-bit character set that contains 128 characters, and it was designed in the early 60s as a standard character set for computers and electronic devices. And this ASCII table defined the alphabet in binary as a decimal value and as a hexadecimal value and as a character. The standard ASCII character has a 7-bit and the basic set range from 0 to 197. The code is rather limited as it does not contain symbols such as Greek letters, lines and so on. And for this purpose the extended ASCII code has been defined so that this fits into the number of 128 to 255. Also it contains the number from 0 to 9 and the upper and lower case, which is English letter from A to Z, and some special characters, and the characters is used in modern computer is in HTML, and on the internet that are all based on ASCII. So what you need to remember with this kind of sequential attack is a blind attack, that is we are just asking question about why you are really asking like yes or no question. Now earlier you saw we talked about how many system or table system that we talked, and I started out trying to guess and explicitly is a 10, and I think now we'll look what we can actually do, and we ask about the range. So we can say which is less than 10 is a greater than 5, and we can really slash the time that it takes in order to make the guess. Now we can do exactly the same thing with letter as well. We just have to convert the letter into a number, and it's the easiest way. So that is just to take you ask, and what you have to do is get you the ASCII value to the letters. So what you are looking at here is the standard ASCII table for the lowercase letters. Now of course you could still have the table that have non-alpha character in them, but could be numbered and could be all subset as symbols. So we were simplifying here, and you may need to expand your scope beyond just this 26 ASCII value, but that's pretty straightforward to do. So you know the ASCII range that you are looking for. Now I want to show you that we are going to ask question about the ASCII range. The main thing is I want to point out the thing is M is the 13th letter of the alphabet and is the dead center, and M is the actual character 109, as you can see 109. So let's have a look at how we are going to answer the question of the database, that variable decision tree. So it became much easier to discover a letter in a position. So once you start asking the right question related, so if you ask the range, so for example the first question I want to ask is the ASCII value of the first character less than or equal to M? Now if it's no, then I am going to go right, and I am going to ask about the S, because S is the next middle character between M and Z. Now there's a note because that's going to fall down to which is less than and equal to V. So now we are narrowing down the range where some are greater than S but less than equal to V. So we are like getting yes response this time. So now we split again, and it is less than or equal to T, and obviously which is greater than S? No, it's not. Therefore it's going to go either to be U or to be V, and that's all, and that's the all we have left it. And we can answer the question explicitly because it's the last possible option, and we are getting either going to go for yes or no. So even we are going to get like 26 letter in the alphabet. You can see these are just a 5 question in here. So what you can do now is what you have to do is just type a query string, and I did this sample or testing purpose for this query string from the website, from an example like a list of page where okay, let me simplify this. So you go to a or visit a page, and in this page you have a list of cars from like supercars, like they have speed, kilometers, power, and etc etc. So I am just going to simplify this for this case. As you can see, I have selected from the supercar in order by case when. So there is a list will be also, you have to have a list like top 10 cars, top 10 supercars, or top 15, top 20 cars. So as you can see, I selected top 1 ASCII, and whichever have a lower string name, 11 from, and which will have a 190 less than equal to 109, because the power should be less than equal to 109, then the kilowatt, else that would be the top is bit kilometer, and then is the end. So this is the query string that we are gonna use. So what you have to do now is you just copy this and select any website that has a similar relation like this, and like I have cars. So just copy this into the website URL, and if you just paste this, you will get that that will select from the supercars that you wanted to search. So you can go through this process. So you can go through this process to discover all the tables and their names or their object ideas. Insist on tables, which you can then use to start a enumerating through system column and find all of those names. Now what I will point out is that I did greatly simplify in here. I kept it to simply letters, because kept in mind that the object name may have numbers and may have a limited set of symbols. So for example, a underscore to make sure that as you are asking this yes or no question, you are asking the right question, and you are not excluding character which could actually exist in the underlying database name. Now the last thing I will say on this mechanism of SQL injection is that yes, it's laborious. In fact, it's very highly laborious, and it's a sort of thing that is a repeatable pattern, and we couldn't actually go and just keep moving position at a time and asking those 5 questions. Previously, as you can see, they are asking those 5 questions about the character, or we could automate it at an inevitably a blind SQL injection attack is going to be something that's very automatically automated. So we'll look at automated tools later, but it's really important that you understand the underlying mechanism, because without knowing how this actually works, your ability to exploit especially increasingly complex or equal injection rigs will be rather limited. So that's all for this ASCII value enumeration. So now let's talk about constructing yes or no on Boolean based injection. So we all know what is SQLi, and we also all know what blind SQLi, but we will now talk about how to extrapolate data from using blind SQL, which is Boolean based. So this type is referred to true and false, and we will ask if this item exists in the same application, that will answer with yes or no, and we will try this attack on a vulnerable logging page, and the following picture I will show you in a simple request to login. So we can simply try it a payout list, which is like or, then 1 is equal to 1, then or 1 is equal to 1 percentage 2 3, or then or is equal to blank, and then try this payload with a double quotation mark, but it will not work. So we can guess the function that will work, but the function is taking password and the username, and it could check the result from the database when we execute the query. So the variable contain the user input, it will return the user info from the database, then the application can check the number and row and which back the result of the query. So the above query will continue one row and which contain the user info, and when we try our payload, it will be like this in this first picture. This will return more than one row. So if the application check the number of rows, it will not log us in, but you can add another simple word to help us solve the program like this. Note that when you used to limit it to use the index numeric 0, which is referred to the first result, not one. It is like an array. Using the last payload, it will return just the first row and the result. Now we could just log in and we can change the user and the number after a limit keyword, and it will back to the next row of the result. But we want to dump some data from the database, but how? So we will use these two major functions, which is ASCII and substring. So this function will help us in another way to exploit the ASCII function and convert the value of its ASCII number, and subtracting function that give us mobility and string, that we can give the string and return. Then what we need is with the first or second character, which is substring. Then we will return the first character of the first word, and this will return then the second letter. Then our payload will be very similar. Then let's go in here, our code. The payload will work, and this will execute a query to return the table name and return just the first table, and pass the name of the substring, which will return the first letter, and pass it to the ASCII. So finally it will return the count of the table, and will compare if is equal to 5 or not. We will automate this, but I want to show you how simple our payload we will use. So we can add proxy to the verb to track the request from our script. This for loop, then we will count for the table that we should dump it and set it as a variable length. The second part will be 3 for loops. First one will return the length of the table name and set it to the table name variable. Second for loop will take the length of the table name and start dumping the letters, and will dump it to the another for loop. Then that will pass to the number like 48 to 122, which ASCII value contains number, letter, uppercase and lowercase, and some social characters. The script then will print the name, and the final result will be similar like this. So we just dump the table, that we can use the same process to dump the column name and dump the data of the column. So it's pretty easy, as you can see. So just you have to follow and do the query correctly. So you can just construct the yes or no function using a boolean, and it will, as you can see, we will ask it using the yes or no, and we attack the variable login page on a, and this simply request to login us, and that's the full code, and that's the output. So let's talk about boolean based injection. So what is boolean based injection? So sometimes there is a no visible error message on the page when an SQL query fails, making it difficult for an attacker to get information from the vulnerable application. However, there is a still way to extract information. Boolean based SQL injection is an inferential type SQL injection. So in a Boolean based SQL injection attack, we simply ask question from the database in the forms of true or false statement. A true statement returns a different result than a false statement. So based upon this, we are also able to enumerate and extract information present in the database. A true statement means that the information that are asking for is present inside the database. A false statement would mean it is not present. To generate a true or false statement, we can use the AND or and inspect the response in the website that returns. So let's talk about how it works. So Boolean based SQLi is one of the attackers sending the SQL query to the database based on true or false that we previously talked. So in this there is a number of user, and we are using the DBWA for this testing, and for to exploit the Boolean SQLi using the DBWA application, and this is vulnerable to SQLi. So in this there is a number of users present in the database. As soon as the user enters the user ID 2 and submit it, it will go to the database and check whether the following user is available or not. So like select first name underscore last name from user where the user ID is 2. So if he is present in the database, it will show message as user ID exists in the database. And if the user enters some wrong user ID, and it will show a message that user is missing from the database. As discussed in the Boolean, we cannot get them out of the database directly. We have to keep on inserting the payload and asking for database for true and false queries, and we'll check the output according to the change of the behavior that it responds. So we have captured the application request using a proxy tool, which is Burp Suite for testing. So observe in this figure we insert a payload ID is equal to 2 or 1 is equal to 0 hash, meaning that it is break the syntax of a SQL query, or 1 is equal to 0 is a false condition. So ID 2 is true. So hash is to comment out the part, or operator works or any input of which is true, it will show output for the true condition. So combine this query, this will look like select first name underscore something like this. So this says as you can see in this picture, the user is present in the database. Now if we insert a payload ID 2 or ID 1 is equal to 1 hash, meaning that it is to break the syntax of SQL query, or 1 is equal to 1 which is true condition, then ID is equal to 2 is true, which is a comment our part. So OR operator works of any input that will true, it will show output for true condition. So combine this query, it will look similarly like this. Similarly, you can use AND operator to perform SQL, and it will show different kinds of output. So as exploit backend database name, we have used substring function, work as arbitrary guessing character for the database. This function returns the specified number of the characters from a particular position of a given string. So as an example, we tried randomly guessing the database name character by character 2 condition, which is true. Then the database is given the string to call the database function, which is 1 comma 1 row and column structure to first name letter by letter. By inserting a percentage 23 as the very first letter to guess the name, but did not get the output. Similarly, B comma C. As we insert B percentage 23, gives ID exists in the database, and we can say that the first letter of the database is D. So brute forcing is the character given the following output. So which is first character is D, second character is V, third character is W, fourth character is A. So you got the database name DVWA. So that's how the Boolean based injection work. Pretty easy, and there is also a time based SQLI, but we will talk about that in our future lectures. So let's talk about blind SQL injection. So at first let's learn about inline SQL injection. So I will be telling, or I will be describing you some of the inline injection that happens when you inject some SQL code in such a way that all parts of the original query that are executed. So injecting string inline. So let's see an example of how that illustrate this kind of attack so that you can fully understand how it works. So like victim has an authentication form of accessing an administration part of its website. So the authentication requires the user to enter a valid username and password. After sending a username and password, the application sends a query to the database to validate the user. The query is simply just in this format, and the application doesn't perform any sanitization of the receiving data, and therefore we have a full control of what we sent over the server. So this is the injecting SQL code inline, and this is the SQL statement creation. So be aware that the data entry for both of the username and the password is enclosed in two single code which you cannot control. You will have to keep that in mind when crafting a valid SQL statement, that this picture shows that the creation of the SQL statement from the user entry. Also, it also shows that the part of the SQL statement that you can manipulate. As I explained earlier, we first start the finding process by injecting input that might trigger anomalies. So in this case, we can assume that we are injecting a string, that we need to make sure that we inject it with a single quotes. So entering a single quote of the username field and click send return for following error, you will have a error like this. So the error indicates that the form is vulnerable to SQL injection. The resultant SQL statement given the preceding in an input like this. The syntax of the query is wrong due to the injected code, and the database throws an error, which the web server sends back to the client. Once we identify the vulnerability, our goal in this scenario is to craft a valid SQL statement which satisfies the condition imposed by the application, so that we can bypass the authentication control. So in this case, we assume that we are attacking a string value, a username, and a user which is usually represented by a string, and because injecting a code return to unclosed quotation mark error, due to these reasons we are going to inject this username field and leaving the password blank. Then the entry will be resulted will be in this following like this. Then the statement will not have any intended result, and it will not return true for every field due to the logical operator of priority, and has a higher priority than over than this, and therefore we could rewrite the SQL statement as follow to make it easier to understand like this. But this is not what we wanted to do, as this will return only the rows in administrator table that contains a blank username or password. We can change this behavior by adding a new or new or condition such as or 1 is equal to 1 or 1 is equal to 1 or this or this. Then we use this. The new or condition makes the statement always return true, and therefore we might bypass the authentication process. So in this previous lecture we saw how we could solve this scenario by terminating the SQL statement. However, you might find a scenario where termination is not possible, and the preceding technique is therefore necessary. Some authentication mechanism cannot be bypassed by returning every row in the administrator table. As we have done in these examples, they might require just one row to be returned. So for this scenario, you may want to try something such as admin and one is equal to 1 or 1 is equal to 1, resulting in a code similar like this. Then we can also inject SQL content in the password field, and which can be easier in this instance. So due to the nature of the statement, we would simply just to inject a true condition such as 1 is equal to 1 to grab this query. So this statement will return all the content in administrator table, as you can see from administrator, thereby successfully exploiting the vulnerability. So this table we'll talk about later provides you a list of injection string that you may need during the discovery and confirmation process of an inline injection in a string field. So as you can see in here, we have covered the basic in inline string injection. So all the examples shown in this section were select queries to clearly illustrate the result of the injection. However, it is important to understand the consequences of injecting into the other SQL queries. Imagine a typically password change functionality on the victim, then the website where the user has to enter their old password for confirmation and supply a new one. This result query would be something like this, where username is equal to Bob and password is equal to old password, like this. Then you can just change a typically like password functionality using just this simple way. So let's talk about this. This is the signature for inline injection of string. So what this means, this result is a error triggering, or if successful then the database will return an error, then this always is a true condition. So if successful, it returns every row in the table, and this is actually a no condition. So if successful, it returns the same result as the original value, and this one always false condition, and if it's successful, it returns no rows from the table. Then this one is Microsoft SQL Server concentration. If successful, it returns the same information as always true condition. And this one is MySQL concatenation. So if successful, it returns the same information as always true condition. And the last one is Oracle and PostgreSQL concatenation. So if successful, it returns the same information as and always true condition. Now if Bob discover a SQL injection issue affecting the old password field and inject a OR function like OR 1 equal to 1, this will be resulted as a consequence of the attack. Yes, the attack would update every single password in the user table to the new password, and therefore user would be able to log on to the application anymore. They cannot just log on after that. So it is very important to understand the code that run on the server and any potential as I was saying. It is very important to understand the code that run on the server and any potential side effect that testing you might have, in order to minimize the risk of the SQL injection or inference the process. Similarly, an OR or 1 is equal to 1 injection in a delete query could easily be delete all the content of the table, and therefore you will need to be very careful when testing these types of query. So previously we saw an example that a string inline injection for bypassing the authentication mechanism. Now we will see another example where you are going to perform a similar attack against a numeric value. User can log into any victim machine or access to their profile, and they can also check messages that sent to them and from the other users. Each user has a unique identifier or UID, which is used to uniquely identify each user in the system. So as you can see this picture, this is the visual representation of a numeric injection. So based on the information retrieved, we can assert that the SQL code running on the server side should be like this. So this picture shows the injection point, the SQL statement creation, and the vulnerability parameter. Note that injection is a number that doesn't require terminating and commencing the single quote delimiters. As I told before, numeric values are handled by the database without delimiting the quotes. So in this example, we are going to directly inject after the UID parameter in the URL. So in this scenario, we have control over the message that return from the database, and the application doesn't perform any sanitization in the UID parameter, and therefore we can interface in the rows that selected from the message table. The method of exploitation in this scenario is to add always true condition. So instead of returning only the message for our user, all of them are displayed, and the URL would be this. So the result of the request would return the message to every user, as you can see in here. The result of the exploitation generated the following SQL statement like this. And this is the exploitation of a numeric injection. Due to the always true condition injected, or the database returns all row in the message table and not just one sent to our user. So in next or in future, you will learn how to exploit this further to read arbitrary data to any table of the database and even from other databases. In this lecture, we are going to be talking about enumeration on database on the system. So firstly, let's talk about MySQL enum. Enum means enumeration. So enum data type is in MySQL is a string object. It allows us to limit the value chosen from a list of permitted value in the column specification at the time of table creation. It is a short for enumeration, which is enum, which means that each column may have one of the specific value, and it uses numeric indexes, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, which is to represent the string values. So MySQL enum data types contain the couple of advantages, like compact data storage, where the column may have a limited set of specified possible values. So here the string value has automatically used as a numeric index. It allows readable queries and outputs because the numbers can be translated again to the corresponding string. It can accept many types data like integer, floating point, decimal, and string. So let's talk about syntax. So these are the syntax used to define enum or enumeration data type in the column. So as you can see, just create table name. So in this syntax, we have defined only 3 enum values, but it can be increased according to our needs. So here we have make sure that enumeration value should always keep inside with a quoted string literal. So MySQL allow us to define the enum data types in the couple of attributes. First one is not null, which is by default the enum data type is null. So if we do not want to allow the null value, it is required to use the not null properties while specifying the enum column. And second one is null, and it is a synonym of default null, and its index value is always null. And third one is default. So when the value is not specified in the column, the enum data type insert the default value. And in other words, if the insert statement does not provide a value for this column, then the default value will be inserted, and the default value expression does not allow the insert function. And enum data types in MySQL insert or includes the default value as null or empty string. So let us understand how enum data type works in MySQL with the following illustration. So here we are going to create a table named charts. As you can see, charts that contains 3 column ID, name and size, name and size. The size column uses the enum data type and has small, medium and large, small, medium and large and X large size. And MySQL maps this enumeration member to a numeric index where small is equal to 1, medium is equal to 2, large is equal to 3 and X large is equal to 4 respectively. And executing the following coding will be look like this. So next we need to insert the value into the table. So during insertion, the enumeration value can be inserted either as the string literal or its numeric indexes, and both are the same. Executing the following statement in the inserted value in this table will look like this. Now execute the select statement to see the inserted value from the table, from this table. So just use select, then this will appear, and the following image contain all the above query result that contains the enumeration value in a string in literals only. So which is mean the string literals will be shown in here. So MySQL sort the enumeration value based on their numeric indexes that depends on the order in which we have inserted a data, that column specification. So for example, if we have defined the enumeration as enum B, A and C, then B comes before A, then empty the strings comes before C, which is non-empty string, and null value comes before the other value. So if we do not want to get unexpected result with enum data type using order by clause, follow this rule. We have to follow a couple of rules, which is like define the enumeration value in the alphabetic order, and it is to make sure that the column name is in like in a lexical order rather than an index number. So the following example contain the enumeration sorting more clearly. So if you want to get the size of a chart of a specific order, execute this statement. Then the query will give the output in here. So we can see the size of a chart in a descending order. As you can see, X large, large, medium, small. So there will be some disadvantages of enum type in MySQL. So first one is, if we want to modify the enumeration value on members, it can be done by rebuilding the entire table using the alter table command. and it makes expensive use of our resources, and also it takes lot of time. We cannot use an expression with enumeration member. For example, the create statement does not execute because it uses concat function for creating an enumeration member. So we cannot also use the user variable as an enumeration member because it cannot seen in here, as you can see, cannot use the user variable. So it is recommended that we should not use the numeric value as enumeration members, and it is complex to get a complete information of enumeration list because we need to access the information scheme on the database, and also we may face an issue during the porting of enum to other like RDBMS because many databases do not support the data type. And finally, we cannot add more attributes to the enumeration list. And that's all how you can actually enumerate a database on the system, and I think that's pretty easy.
Hello everyone, hope you guys are well. So let's talk about network reconnaissance. So the methodologies of reconnaissance is target identifications and selection, target profiling, target validation, and types. There are two types of reconnaissance: passive reconnaissance and active reconnaissance. Active reconnaissance is network and system configuration related, and passive is website, web application, and active is operating system, just like this. In the context of cybersecurity, reconnaissance is the practice of covertly discovering and collecting information about a system. This method is often used in ethical hacking or penetration testing. Like many cybersecurity terms, reconnaissance derives from military languages, where it refers to a mission with the goal of obtaining information from enemy territory. How reconnaissance works? Reconnaissance generally follows 7 steps like collect initial information, determine the network range, identify active machines, find access points and open ports, fingerprint the operating system, discover services on ports, map the network. Using these steps, an attacker will aim to gain the following information about network, and the information is file permissions, running network services, OS platform, trust relationships, user account information. One of the most common techniques involved with reconnaissance is port scanning, which sends data to various TCP and UDP ports on a device and evaluates the response. So there is some difference between passive and active reconnaissance. There are two main types of reconnaissance: active and passive reconnaissance. With active reconnaissance, hackers interact directly with the computer system and attempt to obtain information through techniques like automated scanning or manual testing and tools like ping and netcat. And active recon is generally faster and more accurate but riskier because it creates more noise within a system and has a higher chance of being detected. And passive reconnaissance gathers information without directly interacting with systems using tools such as Wireshark and Shodan and methods such as OS fingerprinting to gain information. How to prevent reconnaissance? Organizations can use penetration testing to determine what their network would reveal in the event of a reconnaissance attack. During testing, organizations can deploy port scanning tools which scan large networks and determine which hosts are up, and vulnerability scanners which known vulnerabilities. Reconnaissance attacks technique perform an information query of a target and description. The threat actor is looking for initial information about a target. Various tools exist, including the Google Search Organization's website, Whois, and more. And technique initiated a plank sweep of the target network and description. The information query usually reveals the target's network address, and the threat actor can now initiate a ping sweep to determine which IP addresses are active. Technique is initiated a port scan of active IP addresses and description. This is used to determine which ports of services are available. Examples of port scanners include Nmap, Superscan, Angry IP Scanner, and NetScan tools. And another technique was run vulnerability scanners, and the description is this is to query the identified ports to determine the type and version of the application and operating system that is running on the host. Examples of tools include Nipper, Senua, PSI Core Impact, Nessus version 6, and Saint and OpenBAS. Run exploration tools is another technique, and the description is the threat actor now attempts to discover vulnerable services that can be exploited. A variety of vulnerability exploitation tools exist, including Metasploit, Core Impact, SQL Map, Social Engineer Toolkit, and NetSparker. So there is some relation or network reconnaissance for SQL injection. So first we need to know what is SQL injection. SQL or structured query language is the standard language for interacting with relational databases. In apps and other types of programming, databases are used to store user data such as usernames and passwords. Databases are also often the most effective secure solution for storing other types of data from public blog posts and comments to confidential bank account numbers. SQL statements often use arguments to pass data from users into secure databases or vice versa, unless the values in these user supplied SQL arguments are secured by sanitizing or prepared statements. Attackers can use the places where your app communicates with a database with a SQL argument to gain access to confidential information and other secured areas. So, what can attackers do with a SQL injection attack? SQLI attacks make use of vulnerabilities in code at the point where it accesses a database. By hijacking this code, attackers are able to access, modify, and even delete secured data. When SQLI attacks are useful, attackers can log into an app or a website front end without a password, access, extract, or delete stored data from secure databases, create their own database records, or modify exists records, opening the door for further attacks. And anatomy of SQL injection attack. In the reconnaissance stage, which entails the research to identify and select targets, attackers will look for places in your app where they can pass unexpected values to SQL statements, suppressing error message simply isn't enough. Common methods for discovering SQL vulnerabilities include adding single quotes and semicolons into user input data and looking for error messages that return information about database structure and naming schemas. It isn't as though you are always going to against a person that you simply need to outsmart. SQL injection attacks are easy to automate, which means you need the best defense in both brainpower and scanning tools. Once they have found vulnerabilities in your app, attackers will create their own SQL statements and use them to manipulate your app's behavior. If their attack is successful, attackers will be able to gain access confidential data. And there is some types of SQL injection, and this is SQL injection error based, blind based, and in the blind based there is two types, boolean based and time based. So this is it, guys. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching.
So now we are going to be talking about replicating a table using open row set. So let's first talk about restrict ad hoc querying. So Microsoft SQL Server supports a command called open row set to query remote and local data sources. Remote querying is useful in that it can be leveraged to attack other database servers on connected networks. Querying is the local server with this, and also with this function allows an attacker to re-authenticate to the server to the context of a more privileged SQL Server database login. You can disable the feature in Windows registry by setting disallow ad hoc access to set to 1 from 0 to each data provider from a software or provider directory. Similarly, Oracle support the hoc querying of remote server via the database link. By default, a normal user does not require this privilege, and you should remove it from the account. So create the create database link privilege to ensure that you only require login and roles that are assigned to avoid attacks that are creating a new law or new link. You should review all database logins and disable or delete those that are unnecessary, such as default account. Additionally, you should enable password strength within this database server to prevent administrator from selecting weak passwords. Attackers can leverage weakly protected account to re-authenticate to the database server and potentially elevate the privilege. Lastly, enable server auditing to monitor suspicious activity, especially failed login. In SQL Server database, consider exclusive use of integrated Windows authentication instead of a less secure SQL Server authentication. When you do this, attacker will be unable to re-authenticate using something like Open Reset. In addition, it reduces the possibility of sniffing password over the network, and it can leverage the Windows operating system to enforce a strong password and account control. So as you can see, from Oracle you can show the version, and from SQL Server you can just using these simple commands. If an attacker is able to break outside to the context of the database server and gain access to the underlying operating system, it is critical that this occurs only the context of less privileged operating system account. You should configure database server software running in a niche system to run in a context of an account that is a member of a custom group and that has a minimal file system permission to run the software. By default, SQL Server 5 and later installers will select the minimal privilege, which is network service account, for running the SQL Server. Keeping software up to date with the current patch level is fundamentally security principle, but it is easy to overlook when given the database server are not usually internet facing system. An attacker can often exploit server vulnerabilities via an application level SQL injection vulnerability just as easily as though he were the if you and he were the same network as the database server. The exploit payload could be in a sequence of SQL command that exploit a SQL injection vulnerability in a PL or SQL package, or even a shellcode to the exploit a buffer overflow in an extended store procedure. Automated update mechanisms are ideal for keeping up to date. You can keep SQL Server up to date with Microsoft Update, and Oracle Database Administrator can check for current update by signing into the Oracle Metalink service. MySQL and PostgreSQL will often be packaged by an operating system vendor like Red Hat and can therefore be patched via the same method used for updating the operating system. So if installed or compiled manually, update will need to be installed manually, and therefore it is not recommended to custom install unless this is most required. Third-party patches management system are another way to keep patch current updated. As you can see previously, we saw that the comments that can help you to determine the version of the database server software for SQL Server and Oracle also included in the links for checking the version, and you can go and check the version in here, and the version information to tell whatever your database server is completely patched on this platform. In general, leaking unnecessary information about software behavior significantly aids an attacker in finding weaknesses within your application. Examples include software version information that can be used to footprint a potentially vulnerable version of an application, and error details related to an application failure, such as an SQL syntax error that occurs on the database server. We are going to look at the ways that surface this information within application deployment description file and hardening the web server configuration. Error messages that include information detailing why a database call failed and extremely useful in the identification and subsequent exploration of a SQL injection. Handling exploration or exceptions and suppression of error messages is most effective when done with application level error handlers. However, inevitably, there is always a possibility of an uninterrupted or unintercepted condition at a runtime. Therefore, it is a good practice to also configure the application framework or web server to return a custom response when unexpected application error results, such as HTTP response with a 500 status code, which means that it is an internal server error. Now, one approach that can help make error detection difficult based on the response is to configure the application and web server to return the same response, such as a redirect to the default home page irrespective of a error code like 401, 403, 500, etc. Obviously, you should use caution when employing in this strategy, as it can make legitimate debugging of application behavior, which will make it difficult. So, if the application has been designed with a good error handling and logging that can provide application administration with enough details to reconstruct the problem, this might be a worthwhile strategy to consider. So, the first one is web application, which is ASP.NET. So, if you can configure the easily in the web.config file. You can just set custom error to 1 or remote only and default redirect to page for display, and ensure that the page configured for the default redirect actually exists and the configured location. Second one is J2EE web application. So, in the web.html file, configure the error page element with an error code and location element, and this will be effective for resources that are especially handled by the Java application server only. Classic ASP. IIS must be configured to suppress the detailed ASP error messages. You can use some setting to configure the ASP, like IIS manager snapping, or you can just go to there and check the configuration and ensure that the send text error message to client option is checked and that an appropriate message exists in the text box will be shown. So, PHP web application. In the php.ini file, set display error to off and additionally configure a default error document to the web server configuration. Refer to the instruction for Apache and IIS for the table. Apache web server. Add the error document directive to Apache that point to the custom page. Like as an example, like you have a error document 500, then just add /custom page.html. And the last one is IIS. So, to configure custom errors in IIS, you can use go to the IIS manager snapping properties and then click on the configuration button, then there will be a edit button, then select a file or URL from the message type drop button to use in the default. So, that's all. In this lecture, we are going to be talking about extracting password from SQL Server hashes. But first, let's talk about installing the password hashes. So, briefly talked about the hashing function earlier when we discussed a successful attack that recovered the password of application users. So, in this lecture, we will talk about the hashes. So, this time regarding the database users. On all common database server technologies, User passwords are stored using a non-reversal hash, which means the exact algorithm that used varies depending on the database server and version, and such hashes are stored, and you guessed it, in a database table. To read the content of the table, you normally need to run your queries with administrative privilege. So if your user does not have any such privilege, then you should probably return to the privilege escalation section. So if you manage to capture the password hashes, various tools can be attempted to retrieve the original password that generate the hashes by means of brute forcing attack. This makes the database password hashes as one of the most common target in any attack, because users often reuse the same password for different machine on different services, and being able to obtain the password of all users is usually enough to ensure a relatively easy and quick expansion of the network target. SQL Server. So if you are dealing with a Microsoft SQL Server, things vary quite a lot depending on the version you are dealing with. In all cases, you will need administrative privilege to access the hashes, but difference start to surface when you actually try to retrieve them, and more importantly, when you try to cap them to obtain the original password. On SQL Server 2000, hashes are stored in a sysx login table of the master database, and you can retrieve them easily by using these sys logins. So such hashes are generated using pwdencrypt, an undocumented function that generated a salted hash. When the salt is a function in a current time, for instance, here is a hash of a system administrative password on one of the SQL server that I use in my test purpose. As you can see, this one is. This hash can be split into couple of parts. As you can see, each hash is generated using the user password and salt as input for the SHA-1 algorithm. So David Lynchfield performed a full analysis on the heat generation of SQL Server 2000, and you can go and search and check that out. So what is interesting to us is the fact that an SQL Server 2000 passwords are case sensitive, which simplifies the job of cracking them. To crack the hashes, you can use a tool like ngSSQL crack or Canaan-Abel. You can find both of them on Google. When developing SQL Server 2005, Microsoft took a far aggressive stance in terms of security and implementation of the password hashing that clearly shows the paradigm shifting. The sys login table has disappeared, and hashes that can retrieve by querying the SQL logging view on the following. As you can see, this line, and this is the example taken from the SQL Server 2005. Then the mean is the hash is modified into the old SQL Server, and 2000 hash is like this, which is case sensitive. So as you can see, Microsoft removed the old case sensitive hash. This means that your brute force attack will have to try a far larger number of passwords that candidates to succeed. In terms of tool, ngSSQL crack and Canaan-Abel are, I think, two of the best, and these two are the best for this attack. Depending on a number of factors, when retrieving a password hash, the web application might not always return the hash in a nice hexadecimal format, like as you can see in here. It is a 3-4 recommended that you explicitly cast its value into the hex string using the function which is fn, like Barbintos hex extra. For instance, this one Barbintos hex extra. MySQL stores its password hashes in the mysql.user table. This table mysql.user. So this is the query to extract them, which means together with the username that belongs to. Then password hashes are most calculating using the password function, but the exact algorithm depends on the version of MySQL that is installed. So before 4.1, a simple 16 character hash was used to, as you can see, 16 character. So starting with MySQL 4.1, the password function was modified to generate a far longer and far secure, as you can see. I think that is 41, I guess, as far as I remember, 41 character hash based on the double SHA-1 hash. Note that the asterisk in the beginning of the hash, it turns out that all password hashes generated by MySQL 4.1 or later start with an asterisk. So if you stumble into a hexadecimal string that starts with an asterisk and that is a 41 character long, it is likely that there is a MySQL installation in the neighborhood. So once you have captured the password hashes, you can attempt to recover the original password with like John the Ripper. You can download it from this like Google search will do, or you can just visit openworld.com/John and to download the John the Ripper, or use the Kane enable, which you can find in www.oxid.it. So if the hashes you have the extracted come from an installation of MySQL 4.1 or later, you need to patch John the Ripper with the John Big Batch, which you can find on Google, and that will do your job. So now that we have seen how to extract data using SQL injection, you can increase the security level to 1, but you can exploit this exactly the same way that you exploit the level 0, and if you increase the level to 5, it's actually very secure and it's going to be as secure as the web login that we see in the login bypass. So it uses the MySQL injection to combine with a single quote and double quote, so it's pretty much uninjectable. So that's what I want to show you in this lecture, is that about the SQL injection, and I'm going to show you in DVWA instead of me tilde. So let's go down our security level. So let's go to DVWA because we will be testing on DVWA. So let's go and set security as low, and let's go to our SQL injection. So I'm going to go to the SQL injection and I'm just put the number 1 and submit. So as you can see, we have got a valid page and give us the first name and the surname of the user ID that will give it. So now that I can inject this in the post or in the box in the URL, and I'm going to inject it in the URL, and I'm going to put a single quote in here. As you can see, we have got a error telling us that there is an error of the statement, which means that there is an SQL injection. So here we can verify it adding a true statement saying that 1 is equal to 1. So 1 is equal to 1, then we have to put, we have to put minus 23, as you can see, showed a valid page. So this actually got my statement true. So we got a normal valid page like we see in here. So it's giving us the first name and the sure name. Now if I say 1 is equal to 0, which I am sure will be invalid. So let's see. As you can see, this place is invalid. So we have got a invalid page, which means that the ID parameter here is injectable and the page is doing it what we are asked to do. So we can also verify this using the order by one, and we can say that so let's say 1 is equal to, so order by 1. So let's see, as you can see, it got a valid page. So if we try in a random number, and it will show us, as you can see, an invalid page. So let's try the build union. So let's try this one, which is union select 1 2. As you can see, it works. So it got a valid page. So as you can see, it display stuff, which is first name 1 and surname 2. And let's say union select in number 1, we're gonna put database to see which is our database in here. So let's also try that. So as you can see, our database is dbws. So I can go ahead and try to select all the tables using my information schema.table. So we're gonna use this. So just type this or copy this code. So I already typed this. So let's go for the union table, and as you can see, I get my tables, which is the guest book and the user. Now we could go ahead and try to select and find the column for each of the, so this is the same thing, just type column in each of these in here. So type column, column, column. As you can see, this will do the same thing, but I'm not going to try that because it's basically the same. So I am actually interested in this data, so we're gonna use this data. So let's try this to see. As you can see, we got our SQL injection, discovered the same way that we did. And we got our like first name is username using our union select and password from the user. So all of those we did using low security. So let's try increase our security to medium. So let's go our SQL injection and try one in here. So let's see. As you can see, it's simply working right now. So let's try put single quote in here as previously to see. So as you can see, we are giving an error, but this error is different. It's actually complaining about the existence of the single quote. So let's try to put an 1 and 1 and 1 is equal to 1 is equal to 1. As you can see, it also shows us error and also gives us an invalid page. So let's try put a HTTP code into code. Instead of a code, I'm gonna put -27 to see if it works. Percentage 27. As you can see, it does same way, it gives us error. So to solve this problem, what you need to do is you just simply remove this code and it will just work, as you can see. So in higher security, you have to change certain things. So previously in code we had to work, but in here we just don't need to use code to work. And this will simply fix our problem and make it injectable. So this will give us a valid page. So let's see to change it as 1 order by 1. Order by 1. As you can see, it gives us the result. So it gives us the valid page. So this website is responded on higher security that we are saying. So only difference now is that we are not using the code in here. So we are just injecting it and it's right away after the ID and after the number. So let's go ahead and try our union select and to see if this works on in here. As you can see, it works and it gives us a valid result with all of those informations of username and schema using union select table name and from information schema dot tables. So that's we always did in here previously, and we also got the result of the table that we need, and here we go, we will get all the tables that we got them before.
Hello everyone, today's topic is evasion techniques and automating attacks. Common sandbox evasion techniques like a common user interactions detect user actions like mouse clicks and document scrolling. Then system analysis, look for characteristics like CPU core count and system reboots. Environmental awareness, verify the real life environment. For instance, find particular hardware or sandbox related process. Then delayed execution, execute malware after a short period of time to successfully leave the sandbox. And data obfuscation, trick the sandbox by changing DNS names for encrypting API calls. So what is an evasion technique? What exactly are evasion techniques? Evasion techniques are what malicious failures use to avoid detection from sandboxing services. Malware authors have two priorities when creating malware: being silent and being deadly, getting as much as they can for as little effort as possible. We thought it would be wise to talk about how effective these evaluation techniques are against traditional sandboxes and how we as leaders handle them in our email's security gateway. Top evaluation techniques: polymorphic code commonly used to bypass pattern and hash based detection. The malware modifies itself in delivery to other locations, thus effectively being really hard to track and detect. User and system interaction detection. Users interact with computer systems in different ways. They are unpredictable in some sense, which makes them obvious to spot. They press keys on a keyboard in a specific way, scroll with the mouse while and click on this thing with the mouse. However, there are no interactions this bespoke in the traditional sandboxed environment. Malicious hackers teach malware to wait for a specific user interaction before exhibiting their malicious behaviors. Examples of this: executing after you scroll to a particular place within a Word document, using paragraph codes in Word files, trojan.apt.being chain activated only after a certain number of mouse clicks are made by user. Other examples of this are timing the speed of the mouse movement and halting all code useless unless the mouse moves at the human speed. Other system check malware perform can be core count technique and allowing malware to find differences between virtual and physical system CPU cores. Many sandbox vendors hide their system settings and hardware, so when the system check is done, the coded malware is returned with null, which is good sign for malware to stop running. Lastly, one of my personal favorite checks is the reboot check, where the malware checks to see if reboot triggers are executed in null. Sandboxes can try to emulate a reboot by logging out and back in as users and sleeping. Now, encoding for evasion. Signatures may look explicitly for specific characters. Various encoding practices can be used to circumvent this, like URL encoding, hex, HTF8, Unicode, SQL's char function. So what is SQL inject me? SQL inject me is the exploit me tool used to test for SQL injection vulnerabilities, and the tool works by submitting your HTML forms and substituting the form value with strings that are representative of an SQL injection attack. And this tool works by sending database escape strings through the form fields, and it then looks for database error messages that are output into the rendered HTML of the page. The tool does not attempting to compromise the security of the given system, and it looks for possible entry points for an attack against the system. And there is no port scanning, packet sniping, password hacking, or firewall attacks done by the tool. You can think of the work done by the tool as the same as the QA testers for the site manually entering all the string into from fields. How to start with SQL inject me? For you to start with SQL inject me, just go to your Mozilla Firefox browser and search the SQL inject me add-on on Google. Once you are on the site, click the add to Firefox button like this in the picture. like this. SQL inject me add. As you notice, message will appear at the left top of the page asking to install software on your computer. Just click the allow button and click the install button. SQL inject me lets you test the page you are viewing of SQL injection vulnerabilities. Each tab represents a form on the page and lists all the fields. Just fill in good values for all the fields and marks which ones are to be tested. They will become yellow. Then click either test all attacks or test with top attacks, like this. After that, SQL inject me sidebar will appear at the left part of the page. As you notice, it contains several inputs forms of the website you are currently in and the forms that you are going to inject scripts. And this is dashboard. SQL inject me. And now select the available scripts on the drop down lists that you prefer. Before executing the test, check the checkbox beside the drop down list, and once you are done, click the execute button at the top part to execute the test. And SQL inject me lets you test the page you are viewing for SQL injection vulnerabilities. Each tab represents a form on the page and lists all the fields. Just fill in good values for all the fields and mark which ones are to be tested. They will become yellow, and then click either test with all attacks or test with top attacks. Just like this. Very simple to use. And after that, the test scripts are currently running. Once all the scripts are done executing, a new tab will appear to display the results of the test. If the website has SQL vulnerability, and that's it. SQL injection is now easy. A new tab will display the result of testing. If the website you're testing is vulnerable to SQL injection, it contains number of failures, warnings and passes. So guys, that's it, and this is how it works. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching. Hello everyone, let's talk about evasion. And first, go to a website. I introduce you a website, sqlmap.org. So SQL Map is an open source penetration testing tool that automates the process of detecting and exploiting SQL injection flaws and taking over of database servers. It comes with a powerful detection engine, many niche features for the ultimate penetration tester, and a broad range of switches lasting from database fingerprinting. And many features of this website, like full support for MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft Access, IBM DB2, SQLite, Firebird, Sybase, SAP MaxDB, Informix, MariaDB, MemSQL, TDB, or many other sites like Apache Ignite, covered inter-systems cache management systems, full support for 6 SQL injection techniques, Boolean based, blind time based, blind error based, union query based, stacked queries, and out of band. Support to directly connect to the database without passing a SQL injection by providing DBMS credentials, IP addresses, port, and database name. Support to enumerate users' password hashes, privileges, roles, databases, tables, and columns. Support to dump database tables entirely, a range of entries or specific columns as per user's choice. The user support established. You guys can go to this website and read the documentation. And the website is sqlmap.org, and it linked with GitHub. You guys can find the documentation, find the software inside GitHub. If you want to store hashes to a temporary file for eventual further processing with other tools, you can do it. Let's check this project in GitHub, because it data all the document in GitHub. It's some screenshot in SQLmap. Here is installation and uses guideline for installation and uses SQLmap. Okay, now another injection tool, Hubby's SQL injection tool. Let's talk about Hubby's SQL injection tool. Hubby's, an automatic SQL injection tool, is distributed by IT Sec team and Iranian security company. Their name Hubby's means carrot, which is the tool's icon. The tool is designed with a user-friendly GUI that makes it easy for an operator to retrieve the desired data. Such ease of use may be reason behind the transition from attacks deployed by code-writing hackers to those by non-technical users. Hubby's was published during 2010, and since its release, several other automatic SQL injection tools such as SQLmap were introduced. However, Hubby's is still active and commonly used by both penetration testers and low-level hackers. So this is the dashboard of Hubby's, and in the target box here you can give a website, your targeted website. You can detect keyword, syntax, method, type, database, and post date. The very simple dashboard of Hubby's advanced SQL injection tool. Here is the target. Hubby's traffic is easily identified by its user agent. And Review of the connections details indicates that majority of the detected attacks included the input 999999.9 usually used to scan website for an injection vulnerability. Most of the queries had the following structure: select star from table underscore example where id equal 999999.9, and error messages are not hidden. Therefore, if an error is received, the source knows the website is vulnerable to injection attempts. And the command is select, and database command select star from table underscore example id where id equal convert int db name. Hubby's attempts, Hubby's scans for several SQL vulnerabilities is detected by other IPS protections as well. SQL servers, MySQL, vendor specific SQL injection, time based SQL injection, stack query SQL injection, SQL servers SQL injection, evasion techniques, union query based SQL injection. And this is source country: Denmark, Romania, United States, Netherlands, Sweden, Australia, Morocco, or many other countries in the world. Let's talk about how NetSparker work in SQL injection. In this dashboard, here login from URL in this box. This is your target box. I give here hack your first self.troyhunt.com, and you can create many several attacks by NetSparker like SQL injection, blind SQL injection, to find their vulnerability. And in blind SQL injection, you guys find vulnerability details and gathering some more information about target. Hello everyone, hope you guys are well. Today's topic is basics of XSS and anti-forgery tokens. Who has access unable to load sharing information. So let's start it. Cross-site scripting or XSS. Look at this picture. So what is cross-site scripting? Cross-site scripting XSS is an attack in which an attacker injects malicious executable scripts into the code of trusted application or website. Attackers often initiated an XSS attack by sending a malicious link to a user and inducing the user to click it. If the app or website lacks proper data sanitization, the malicious link executes the attacker's chosen code on the user's system. As a result, the attacker can steal the user's active session cookie. How does cross-site scripting work? Look at this example. Script I equal new slash star star, then image and image source, then http site plus document dot cookie plus document dot location, then script. While the payload is usually JavaScript, XSS can take place using any client-side language to carry out a cross-site scripting attack. an attacker injects a malicious script into a user. Attackers can also carry out an attack by modifying a request. If the web app is vulnerable to XSS attacks, the user supplied input executes as code. For example, in the request below, the script displays a message box with the text XSS. http www.site.com/page.php script alert, then inside the bracket XSS text box. There are many ways to trigger an XSS attack. For example, the execution could be triggered automatically when the page loads or when a user hovers over specific elements of the page. Potential consequences of cross-site scripting attacks include these, like capturing the keystroke of a user, redirecting a user to a malicious website, running web browser-based exploits, obtaining the cookie information of a user who is logged into a website. In some cases, the XSS attack leads to complete compromise of the victim's account. Attackers can trick users into entering credentials on a fake form, which provides all the information to the attacker. So, XML and AJAX interaction. We are assuming that the average reader of this book or this watching these guys who's familiar with the fundamentals of JavaScript and HTML, both of these technologies are based on standard and protocols that have been around for many years, and there is an unlimited amount of information about how they work and what you can do with them on the internet. However, given the relatively new introduction of AJAX and extensive markup language XML into the web world, we felt it was a good idea to provide a basic overview of these two technologies. AJAX is a term that is often considered as being strongly related to XML, as the XML acronym is used as a part of the name. That's not always the case. AJAX is a synonym that describes new approaches that have been creeping into web development practices for some time. At its basic, AJAX is a set of techniques for creating interactive web applications that improve the user experience, provide greater usability, and increase their speed. The roots of AJAX were found long before the term was picked up the mainstream web developers in 2005. The core technologies that are widely used today in regards to AJAX were initiated by Microsoft with the development of various remote scripting techniques. The set of technologies that are defined by AJAX are a much better alternative than the traditional remote components such as iframe and layer elements defined in the dynamic hypertext markup language (DHTML) programming practices. The most basic and essential component of AJAX is the XML HTTP request JavaScript object, and this object provides the mechanism for remote content from a server without the need to refresh the page and browser has currently loaded, and this object comes in many time. So here is method and description. Method or property, whatever you say, like abort the request, get all response headers, first bracket, and return the response headers as a string. Get response header name, return the value of the header specified by name. Set request header name and value, and set the value of the header specified the name. Open method URL, open method URL, open method URL. Asynchronous username method URL. And description, it set the value of the header specified by the name. Open the target object by setting up method that will be used and the URL that will be retrieved. Optionally, you can specify whether the request is synchronous or asynchronous and what credentials need to be provided if the requested URL is protected. On read, and this is holding there. So some solutions: fast track, history of XSS vulnerabilities exist since the early days of the web. In 1999, inspired by the work of Georgy Guniski, David Rose published the first paper on XSS Plus entitled Script Injection, and in 2005 the first XSS worm known as Shami attacked the popular social networking website MySpace. Web application security. The web is one of the largest growing industries, a playground of 800 million users, home of 100 million websites, and transporter of billions of dollars every day. This is huge. And web application security is a term that describes the methods of securing web-based software. Web traffic is often allowed to pass through corporate firewalls to enable e-commerce. XSS, although a small part of the web application security field, represents the biggest threat. XML and AJAX introduction. I already discussed about AJAX and XML. AJAX is a technology that powers interactive web application with improved user experience, greater usability, and increased processing speed. The core component of AJAX is the XML HTTP request object. One topic is anti-forgery token, and this is how anti-forgery token encrypted with web server as key and get from the server. Look how it transfer data and how it works. User to server, user opens up web form, user receives token, response receipts, and the user now knows the request was successful. Server generates the anti-forgery token and sends back the user, validates the token process, generates the response to allow. So this is how it works and life cycle of anti-forgery. So guys, this is for it. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching. Hello everyone. Let's talk about API attack. What is an API attack? An API attack is abusive or manipulative uses or attempt uses of an API, commonly used to breach data or manipulate a commerce solution. The growth of APIs, application programming interfaces, is more important than ever. It can lead to malicious traffic growth. Consequently, according to Gator, by 2022, API abuse will move from an infrequent to the most frequent attack vector, resulting in data breaches for enterprise web applications. It is extremely important to acquire a clear idea of these threats. We will dive into more technical terms in order to have a structured, clear idea of the different API attack types. Attack API. Attack API. Attack API is a web-based attack construction library built with hypertext preprocessor, PHP, JavaScript, and other client-side and server-side technologies. It consists of many modules with dozens of different functionalities that can be used from the browser, as well as modules with dozens of different functionalities that can be used from the browser as well as from a JavaScript interpreter. The goal of the library is to provide an easy and conscious interface for implementing exploits, for testing and demonstrating purposes. Before we start delving into attack API subroutines, we need to do some preparation. First, download a copy of the library and prepare a testing environment where you can develop most of the examples. For the purpose of this exercise, you need to install and run the applications as listed here, like HTTP server with support for PHP, apache.org, www.php.net, wamserver.com, the latest API attack from GNU Citizen, Mozilla Firefox, Get Firefox, Firebug Firefox extension. Start Apache HTTP server and make sure that PHP is running correctly. There are many resources online that can help you with this task. And next, download the attack API packages from GNU Citizen and extract its context somewhere in your web server root folder. For example, if you are using WMP, you can put the files inside WMP attack API. Make sure that you are running Firefox with the Firefox extension installed. We discussed the Firebug application debugger earlier in this book, so please review that section for more information on this invaluable tool. The reason we need all these components is because we are going to do some agile programming exercises, which are much easier to perform from the Firebug dynamic console instead of saving and opening random temporary files. While we use Firefox for demonstrating attack API capabilities, keep in mind that the majority of these examples will work on other browsers as well. Once you are ready with the initial setup, open Firefox and point it to the attack API folder served from the local host, and you should see something similar to that shown on this picture. Go to build tests, fire test interactive.html, and this file contains all the necessary elements that we are going to use over the next few projects. The rest the standalone instances of attack API and contains shortcuts to attack API methods for easier use. Attack API is highly structured library. At the time of attack API, you can load attack API bookmark to load attack API on a page of your choice. This works very well when you need to develop an exploit for a specific site but you don't want to modify the page source code or insert a script tag manually. Firebug. The bookmarklet can be downloaded from www.gnewcitizen.org. This is the dashboard and large command line. Because you will typing a lot of code, you may end up making mistakes. If the larger command line is open, you can make fixes quickly and easily. Okay, now let's talk about enumerating the client. The first thing an attacker does once they gain control of the victim's browser is to investigate what client and platform he or she attacking. Like this is easily achieved using the Firebug command line type console.log. As you can see, this browser type and operating system version is easily accessible in this picture. However, attackers can do a lot more. In this Firebug command line type, the following two lines of code like console.dri inside the bracket a.getCookies and again console.dri dir inside the bracket dot get $a.get plugins semicolon. The get cookies function retrieves all available cookies in an easily accessible JavaScript object so that we don't have to parse the document.core cookie DOM object manually. In a similar fashion, to get cookies function, the get plugins function retrieves a list of all currently installed browser plugins, and this function works on most browsers, but it won't work on Internet Explorer IE. And if you know the name of the cookie you are looking for, you can simply call the get cookie function by console.log, and the code is sa.getCookie session id. inside the bracket and close that in semicolon. Attack API is capable of retrieving the data stored in the clipboard if the client is using I to get or set the clipboard. Use the attack_api.com.getClipboard and attack_api.com.setClipboard functions respectively. The clipboard usually contains information that is interesting to attackers, such as when users copy and paste their passwords. By using this function, attackers can easily steal the clipboard data and use it to gain control of the user account. So that's it for today, guys. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching. Hey there. So let's talk about cross-site request forgery attack. Have a look in this picture. CSRF attacker forged a request embedded in an answer or image tagged to the victim, and victim clicks the link or image to send a forged request. Fund transfer is initiated once this is happened. Request is received by the server and the data is go to random bank. Here website visitor perpetrator forges a request for a fund transfer to a website. Perpetrator embeds the request into a hyperlink and sends it to the visitors who may be logged into the site, and the visitor clicks on the link, inadvertently sending the request to the website, and website validates the request and transfers funds from the visitor's account to the perpetrator. What is cross-site scripting forgery, CSRF? Actually, cross-site request forgery, also known as CSRF, is an attack whereby an attacker tricks an end user to execute unwanted actions on a web application in which they are currently authenticated. The impact of the attack depends on the level of permissions that the victim has on the application. Such attacks take advantage of the fact that his website completely trusts a user once it can confirm that the user is indeed who they saw there. CSRF attacks exploit the trust a web application has in an authenticated user. Conversely, cross-site scripting. Look the left side picture. Victim first logs into bank account, and then bank assigns victim a validation token. Hackers send forged requests disguised as legitimate communication from the bank. Then first request is executed by the bank using previously assigned validation token. This is how hacker gather victims information. CSRF is an attack that tricks the victim into submitting a malicious request on behalf of an attacker. It inherits the identity and privileges of the victim to perform an undesired function on the victim's behalf. For most sites, browser requests automatically include any credentials associated with the site, such as the user's session token, IP address, and so forth. Therefore, if the user is currently authenticated to the site will have no way to distinguish between the forced request sent by the victim and legitimate request sent by the victim. However, CSRF attacks executed. There are two main parts to executing a cross-site request forgery attack. The first one is tricking the victim into clicking a link or loading a page. This is normally done through social engineering and malicious links. And let's say that online banking application is built using the GET method to submit a transfer request. As such, Jima's request to transfer $500 to Alex with account number 252525 might look like this: get https demobank.com online banking transfer amount 500 and account number 252525 http:/1.1. Aligning with the first requirement to successfully launch a CSRF attack, an attacker must craft a malicious URL to transfer $5,000 to the account 262626, like demobank.com online banking transfer account number. Using various social engineering attack methods, an attacker can trick Jimma into loading the malicious URL. This can be achieved in various ways. For instance, there are some limitations to carry out a successful CSRF attack. Consider the following, like number 1, the success of a CSRF attack depends on a user's session with a vulnerable application. The attack will only be successful if the user is an active session with the vulnerable application. An attacker must find a valid URL to malicious craft. The URL needs to have a state-changing effect on the target application. An attacker also needs to find the right values for the URL parameters, otherwise the target application might reject the malicious request. Look at this picture. The user login into the XY bank example bank site for checking his account details. In browser, the user often other website which is malicious site, and the malicious site use already logged in and trapped get trapped the user. So this is the picture. So threat agents, anyone who can load content into your users' browsers and thus force them to submit a request to your website. Attackers approach. Attackers creates forced HTTP requests and tricks a victim into submitting them. Image tags, XSS, or numerous other techniques. Security weakness. CSRF takes advantages the fact that most web apps allow attackers to predict all the details of a particular action. Security weakness. How to spot detection of CSRF flaws is fairly easy penetration testing or code analysis. Technical impact. Attackers can trick victims into performing any state-changing operation the victim is authorized to perform. Business impact. The impact to your reputation. Imagine not being sure if users intended to take these actions. So this is actually what is cross-site request forgery, CSRF, and it uses and how attackers gain information. That's it for today. Hope you guys liked it, and thanks for watching.